Hello, family. Enjoy this relaxing moment with Surly Tales. Remember to hit the like button, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments. It means the world to us. Also, share this video with your friends and loved ones, and turn on post notifications so you don't miss future videos from us. Thank you as you do so. Sit back and relax as we dive into the story. The city was a cacophony of noise, colors, and relentless activity. In the bustling district of Makand, where the markets overflowed with goods and people moved in a constant stream, Amina lived quietly in a modest one-room home. Her life was simple, unassuming, and deeply rooted in a sense of humility she had carried with her from her village in northern Ghana. The house was nothing to boast about. Its corrugated iron roof had rusted from years of exposure to the harsh African sun, and the walls, once painted a vibrant blue, were now faded and cracked. Inside, the room was impeccably neat. A wooden bed with a colorful patchwork quilt sat in one corner, a small gas stove and a single cupboard in another. Her most prized possession, an old leather-bound journal that had belonged to her late father, rested on a shelf above the bed. Amina's days started early. By dawn, she was on her rickety bicycle, pedaling through the crowded streets toward Emerald Hills Estate, a sprawling gated community known for its grandeur. Her job as a cleaner didn't pay much, but it was enough to sustain her modest lifestyle and send money back to her mother in the village. Emerald Hills Estate was a symbol of everything Amina's life was not. The mansions stood like palaces, each one unique in its opulence. Some were adorned with towering marble columns. Others boasted infinity pools that seemed to spill into the horizon. Luxury cars lined the driveways, and the air smelled of freshly mowed lawns and imported flowers. The residents were equally ostentatious. Men in tailored suits and women draped in designer clothes often passed Amina without a second glance. On occasion, they'd smirk or make offhand comments, mocking her simple attire, a plain blouse, a long skirt, and her ever-present scarf. "She must think this is a museum," one of them joked as Amina paused to admire a fountain in the estate's central park. "She probably couldn't even afford the tiles in my bathroom," another sneered, loud enough for her to hear. Amina didn't respond. She never did. Instead, she smiled politely and carried on with her work, her dignity intact. What they didn't know, what none of them could have imagined, was that the very land they walked on once belonged to her family. A glimpse of the past. Amina's father, Baba, had been a visionary. In the years before his untimely death, he had acquired vast stretches of land in Makand. Back then, the area was nothing more than bushland, a far cry from the thriving city it had become. Baba had plans to develop the land, to build schools, markets, and affordable housing. But his dreams were cut short when he passed away suddenly, leaving behind a grieving widow and a young daughter. After his death, the land was sold off in questionable deals orchestrated by corrupt officials and greedy businessmen. Amina's mother, overwhelmed by the loss and burdened with raising her child alone, had no choice but to retreat to their village. Amina had always known bits and pieces of this story, but it wasn't until she stumbled upon her father's journal years later that she understood the full extent of their loss. In its pages, Baba had detailed his plans, his dreams, and the rightful ownership of the land that was now Emerald Hills Estate. Life in the shadows. At Emerald Hills, Amina was a silent observer. She watched as the wealthy residents threw extravagant parties, their laughter echoing across the estate. She cleaned their homes, noting the wastefulness and the emptiness hidden behind their glossy exteriors. While they mocked her, Amina noticed their insecurities, the cracks in their marriages, the weight of their debts, the loneliness masked by their lavish lifestyles. One mansion in particular held her attention. House number 7 was the grandest of them all, a modern architectural marvel with floor-to-ceiling glass windows and a sprawling garden. Its owner, Mr. Obesa, was a prominent businessman known for his arrogance. He often barked orders at Amina, treating her like she was invisible. But Amina didn't mind. Each time she stepped into the mansion, she felt a strange connection to it. The land it stood on was where her father's old homestead once stood. The thought gave her strength, reminding her that she wasn't just a cleaner. She was a daughter carrying her father's legacy. A glimmer of hope. One evening, after a particularly grueling day, Amina sat on the floor of her room, thumbing through her father's journal. She paused at a page where he had written about a document, a deed proving his ownership of the Makand land. Her heart raced as she read his words. Could it still exist? And if it did, what would it mean for her? Determined, Amina began searching through the old chest of belongings her mother had sent with her. After hours of sifting through faded photographs and yellowed papers, she found it. An official document bearing her father's name, the seal of the local government, and a clear declaration of ownership. Tears welled in her eyes as she clutched the paper. For the first time in years, she felt a spark of hope. Perhaps her father's dreams weren't lost after all. Perhaps she could reclaim what was rightfully hers. The dawn of a new journey. The next morning, as Amina cycled to Emerald Hills, she felt different. The residents' mocking stares no longer fazed her. Her simple home, which they ridiculed, no longer felt like a limitation. It was a symbol of resilience, a testament to her journey. She glanced at house number 7 as she passed, a small smile playing on her lips. They laughed at her simple home, not knowing that she now held the key to reclaiming their luxurious mansion. And so, Amina's quiet revolution began. The city buzzed with life as Amina pedaled through the narrow streets of Makand, her bicycle creaking under the weight of her thoughts. In her bag, tucked safely among her belongings, was the deed to the land that had once been her father's legacy. As she approached the gates of Emerald Hills estate, her gaze lingered on the towering iron gates and the security guards who waved her through without so much as a glance. They didn't know who she was, or who she could become. A world of contrasts. Emerald Hills was a world apart from the chaos of Makand. Inside the gates, everything was meticulously curated. The streets were lined with palm trees, their leaves swaying gently in the breeze. The lawns were emerald green, watered daily by an army of gardeners. The mansions stood like fortresses, each one a testament to its owner's wealth and taste, or lack thereof. Amina parked her bicycle at the staff quarters, a small building hidden from the main estate. She changed into her uniform, a plain white blouse and black trousers, before beginning her rounds. Her first stop of the day was house number 7, the jewel of the estate. The owner, Mr. Obesa, was a man of contradictions. On the surface, he was a picture of success, a billionaire businessman with investments in real estate, oil, and technology. He was always impeccably dressed, his suits tailored to perfection, his shoes gleaming. But Amina had seen another side of him. She had overheard his heated arguments with his wife, the long silences that followed, and the tension that hung in the air like a dark cloud. As she cleaned the marble floors and polished the glass surfaces, Amina couldn't help but think about the irony. This house, this symbol of power and prestige, stood on land that rightfully belonged to her family. The thought filled her with a quiet resolve. The secrets of the estate. Amina's work took her into the homes of Emerald Hill's most prominent residents. There was Mrs. Chikir, a socialite who threw lavish parties but couldn't seem to hold a meaningful conversation with her own children. Then there was Mr. Adewale, a politician whose speeches about integrity belied the stacks of cash hidden in his study drawer. The more Amina observed, the more she realized how hollow their lives were. Their wealth, though dazzling, was a facade. Beneath the surface, they were riddled with insecurities, their lives dictated by appearances and societal expectations. One afternoon, while cleaning Mrs. Chikir's bedroom, Amina found herself drawn to a photograph on the nightstand. It was a picture of a young Mrs. Chikir, her face radiant with joy, standing in front of a modest home much like Amina's own. It was a stark contrast to the cold, sterile mansion she now inhabited. "Do you like it?" Mrs. Chikir's voice startled Amina. She turned to see the woman standing in the doorway, a glass of wine in her hand. "It's beautiful," Amina said softly, unsure of what else to say. Mrs. Chikir sighed, her gaze distant. "That was before all this," she said, gesturing around the room. Amina didn't press further, but the moment stayed with her. It was a reminder that wealth didn't equate to happiness. Uncovering the truth. That evening, after her shift, Amina sat on the floor of her room, the deeds spread out before her. She had always been good with numbers and legal documents, a skill she had honed while helping her mother manage their meager finances. As she studied the paper, she noticed a name that stood out: Chief Abiadin, the man who had orchestrated the sale of her father's land. A quick search online revealed that Chief Abiadin was now retired, living in a secluded mansion on the outskirts of the city. Determined to uncover the truth, Amina decided to pay him a visit. The next morning, she set out on her bicycle, the deeds safely tucked into her bag. The journey was long and arduous, but Amina's resolve kept her going. By midday, she arrived at a sprawling estate surrounded by high walls and an imposing gate. She hesitated for a moment before pressing the intercom button. The voice that answered was gruff and impatient. "Who is it?" "My name is Amina," she said, her voice steady. "I need to speak with Chief Abiadin. It's about the Makand land." There was a pause, then the gate buzzed open. Amina walked through, her heart pounding. The mansion was grand but unwelcoming, its windows dark and its gardens overgrown. She was led into a study where an elderly man sat behind a massive desk, his eyes sharp despite his age. "What do you want?" he asked, his tone curt. Amina took a deep breath and placed the deed on the desk. "This belonged to my father," she said. "He was the rightful owner of the Makand land." Chief Abiadin stared at the paper, his expression unreadable. For a long moment he said nothing. Then he leaned back in his chair and sighed. "You have no idea what you've stumbled upon," he said. "A web of deceit." Over the next hour, Chief Abiadin revealed a story of greed and betrayal. After Baba's death, the government had seized the land under the guise of public development. But instead of building schools and hospitals, they had sold it to private developers for a hefty profit. Chief Abiadin, then a young official, had been a key player in the scheme. "I was just following orders," he said, though his voice lacked conviction. It was a different time. Amina listened in silence, her emotions a mix of anger and determination. She knew reclaiming the land wouldn't be easy, but she was ready to fight. As she left the mansion, the sun setting behind her, she felt a sense of purpose she hadn't felt in years. She wasn't just fighting for her family's legacy, she was fighting for justice. The beginning of a battle. That night, as Amina lay in her bed, she thought about the residents of Emerald Hills. They laughed at her, mocked her simplicity, and dismissed her as insignificant. But they didn't know the truth. They didn't know that the land their mansions stood on belonged to her. And soon they would find out. The following days were a whirlwind of activity for Amina. She had made her decision: she would reclaim her family's land, no matter the obstacles. But stepping into a world dominated by wealth and influence required careful planning and unwavering courage. Armed with her father's deed and the revelations from Chief Abiadin, Amina began her quiet but resolute battle. The first step. Amina's first move was to seek legal counsel. She didn't have much money, but she remembered hearing about a young lawyer in Makand who had a reputation for taking on cases involving corruption and land disputes. His name was Femi, and his office was a modest space above a busy market. When Amina entered the office, Femi looked up from his cluttered desk. He was in his late 20s, with sharp eyes and an air of quiet determination. He listened intently as Amina explained her story, showing him the deed and recounting her meeting with Chief Abiadin. "This is a strong case," Femi said, leaning back in his chair. "But it won't be easy. The people who now own this land have deep pockets and powerful connections. They'll fight this tooth and nail." "I understand," Amina said, her voice steady. "But this land was my father's dream. I can't let it go without a fight." Femi nodded, impressed by her resolve. "Very well. We'll start by filing a claim in court. But you need to prepare yourself. This could take months, maybe even years." "I'm ready," Amina replied. The reaction. The news of Amina's legal claims spread quickly through Emerald Hills estate. At first, the residents dismissed it as a joke. How could a cleaner from the suburbs possibly challenge their ownership of their prized mansions? But as the legal summons began to arrive, their laughter turned to outrage. Mr. Obesa, the owner of house number 7, was particularly incensed. He stormed into the estate's management office, demanding answers. "Who does this girl think she is?" he thundered. "She's a nobody." But behind closed doors, the residents began to panic. Many of them had acquired their properties through shady deals, and the idea of those transactions being scrutinized in court made them uneasy. They began to unite, pooling their resources to hire a team of high-powered lawyers. The power of the press. Amina's story soon caught the attention of the media. A local journalist, Kemi, ran an investigative piece titled "The Cleaner Who Dares to Challenge the Elite." The article detailed Amina's journey, her father's legacy, and the legal battle she was embarking on. It painted a stark contrast between the simplicity of her life and the excesses of Emerald Hills. The article struck a chord with the public. People across the city, and even the country, began to rally behind Amina. Social media buzzed with hashtags like #JusticeForAmina and #LandIsHerLegacy. Donations poured in to support her legal fees, and community leaders offered their backing. The residents of Emerald Hills, meanwhile, found themselves under a harsh spotlight. Every aspect of their lives was scrutinized, their wealth and privilege becoming symbols of greed and inequality. The courtroom drama begins. The first court hearing was held in a packed courtroom. On one side sat Amina, Femi, and a small group of supporters. On the other side were the residents of Emerald Hills, represented by a team of expensive lawyers in tailored suits. The opposing counsel argued that Amina's claim was baseless, calling her a fraud and questioning the authenticity of her documents. But Femi was prepared. He presented the original deed, complete with government seals and signatures, as well as testimony from Chief Abiodun, who confirmed the illegal sale of the land. The judge, a stern woman with a reputation for fairness, listened carefully. "This is a serious matter," she said. "The evidence presented warrants further investigation. The court will reconvene in 2 weeks." As Amina left the courtroom, she felt a mix of relief and determination. The battle was far from over, but she had taken the first step. The residents of Emerald Hills didn't take the court's decision lightly. They began to smear Amina's name, spreading rumors about her motives. Some claimed she was being used by political opponents to tarnish their reputations. Others accused her of fabricating the documents. Amina endured the backlash with quiet strength. She focused on her work, her supporters, and her growing network of allies. Among them was Kemi, the journalist, who continued to highlight her story and expose the corruption that had led to the sale of the land. But the pressure took its toll. Late at night, in the solitude of her room, Amina often found herself overwhelmed by the enormity of the task ahead. It was during these moments that she turned to her father's journal, finding comfort in his words and drawing strength from his unwavering vision. Turning point. 2 weeks later, the court reconvened. This time, Femi presented new evidence, documents obtained through a Freedom of Information request that revealed the shady deals behind the sale of the Makand land. The papers showed that several of the current residents of Emerald Hills had been complicit in the transactions. The courtroom erupted as the judge pored over the evidence. The residents' lawyers scrambled to refute the claims, but the cracks in their defense were beginning to show. By the end of the hearing, the judge issued a statement. "This case has revealed troubling evidence of corruption and fraud. The court will require a full audit of all transactions related to the Makand land. Until then, the ownership of the properties in question will remain under review." A glimpse of victory. As Amina walked out of the courtroom, she was greeted by a crowd of supporters chanting her name. For the first time, she allowed herself to smile. The battle was far from over, but the tide was turning. She was no longer just a cleaner from the suburbs. She was a symbol of justice and resilience. The residents of Emerald Hills watched from the shadows, their confidence shaken. They had laughed at her, mocked her, and dismissed her. But now, they were beginning to realize the truth. The girl they had underestimated was not just challenging their ownership of their mansions, she was challenging everything they stood for. And she was winning. The courtroom battles raged on for months, each session bringing new revelations, heightened tensions, and deeper cracks in the seemingly impenetrable world of Emerald Hills estate. For Amina, this was no longer just a fight for her family's land. It was a battle for justice, a reckoning for the wrongs committed against her father and the generations of people like him who had been exploited and silenced. The growing support. Amina's story became a national sensation. News outlets regularly featured updates on the case, turning her into an unexpected hero. Across the country, people saw her as a symbol of resilience, a beacon of hope for those fighting against systemic corruption. The support overwhelmed her. Strangers sent her messages of encouragement, and activists held rallies demanding justice. Even some prominent figures, including lawyers, journalists, and cultural leaders, lent their voices to her cause. Social media buzzed with hashtags like #JusticeForAmina and #RightfulOwner. Emerald Hills, once the epitome of exclusivity and privilege, became the focus of intense scrutiny. Each new headline revealed another layer of corruption tied to the estate's development. The mansion owners, once untouchable, now found themselves vilified in the court of public opinion. Emerald Hills unraveled. The residents of Emerald Hills were in disarray. Once united by their wealth and shared disdain for Amina, they were now turning against each other. Some blamed the developers for selling them tainted properties. Others accused each other of being complicit in the fraudulent deals. Mrs. Shakir, once the queen of Emerald Hills' social scene, became a recluse. Her parties stopped, and her children, who had grown distant over the years, began to speak openly about their family's dysfunction. Mr. Adewale, the politician, faced a corruption probe, his name dragged through the mud in both the courts and the media. And then there was Mr. Obesa, the most vocal opponent of Amina's claim. His confidence had begun to waver, his arrogance tempered by the growing mountain of evidence against him. He had once laughed at the idea of Amina challenging him. Now, he spent sleepless nights worrying about the possibility of losing everything. The turning point. The defining moment came during a pivotal court hearing. Femi, ever meticulous, presented a final piece of evidence, a handwritten agreement between Baba and the local government. The document, signed by the town's former chief, confirmed that the land had been set aside for community development and was never meant for private sale. The courtroom was silent as the judge examined the document. The residents' lawyers tried to argue that the agreement was invalid due to the passage of time, but the judge was unmoved. "This document is clear," she said, her voice firm. "The Makand land was unlawfully sold. The court finds sufficient grounds to void the current ownership of the properties in question. A full review of the deeds will be conducted, and restitution must be made to the rightful heir, Ms. Amina Babayaro." The words hung in the air like a thunderclap. Amina felt her knees weaken as the weight of the moment hit her. She had won. The land her father had dreamed of transforming was hers again. The public reaction. The verdict sent shockwaves through the city. News outlets declared it a landmark victory against corruption, and social media erupted in celebration. People from all walks of life hailed Amina as a hero, a David who had triumphed over the Goliath of systemic greed. The residents of Emerald Hills, however, were devastated. Some tried to appeal the decision, clinging to the hope of overturning the ruling. Others quietly began to pack up their belongings, unwilling to face the humiliation of being evicted. Among them was Mr. Obesa, who confronted Amina outside the courtroom. His once commanding presence was now diminished, his voice tinged with desperation. "Ms. Babayaro," he said, his tone almost pleading, "I've lived in that house for years. My family, my children grew up there. Surely you can find it in your heart to let us stay." Amina regarded him calmly. She thought about the nights she had spent cleaning his mansion, the insults she had endured, and the land her father had lost. But she also thought about the future, the kind of person she wanted to be, the legacy she wanted to leave behind. "I'll consider it," she said finally, "but on my terms." A new vision. With the courts ruling in her favor, Amina became the legal owner of the land that encompassed Emerald Hills estate. But instead of moving into one of the mansions, she chose to remain in her modest home in Makand. The estate, she decided, would not remain a monument to greed. Over the following months, Amina worked tirelessly to transform the estate into a community resource center. The mansions were repurposed as schools, vocational training centers, and affordable housing for underprivileged families. The Central Park became a public space where children could play, and the once exclusive roads were opened to the public. The residents who had mocked her were forced to reckon with their new reality. Some, like Mrs. Chikir, chose to stay and contribute to the community, volunteering their time and resources. Others, like Mr. Obesa, left quietly, their pride unable to withstand the shift. The revelation. One evening, as Amina stood in the park that now teemed with life, she thought about her father. She could almost hear his voice, see his smile as he looked at the land he had once dreamed of transforming. His vision had finally come to life, not as a private empire, but as a shared legacy for the people of Makand. The laughter of children filled the air, blending with the chatter of families and the hum of a community rediscovering itself. Amina smiled, her heart full. The journey had been long and fraught with challenges, but she had reclaimed not just her father's land, but also his dream. They had laughed at her simple home, not knowing she owned their luxurious mansions. Now, those mansions were hers, and she had turned them into something far greater than anyone could have imagined. Amina stood at the heart of what was once Emerald Hills Estate, now renamed Babayaro Community Center, after her father. The transformation was almost complete. What had once been a gated sanctuary for the elite was now a vibrant hub of activity and hope. The roads bustled with schoolchildren, mothers tending small vegetable gardens, and young men and women learning trades that would equip them for brighter futures. It was a dream come true, but for Amina, it was only the beginning. A vision realized. The mansion that once belonged to Mr. Obesa, the crown jewel of the estate, was now a vocational training institute. Inside, classrooms brimmed with students learning carpentry, tailoring, IT, and other practical skills. Across the street, the former home of Mrs. Chikir had been converted into a state-of-the-art clinic, providing free healthcare to the community. Amina, dressed in her usual modest attire, moved quietly among the people, ensuring that everything ran smoothly. She had rejected the idea of moving into one of the mansions, instead choosing to remain in her one-room home in Makand. "My life doesn't need luxury," she often said. "It needs purpose." The return of dignity. The transformation wasn't easy. Amina had faced resistance from many former residents of Emerald Hills. Some had left bitterly, refusing to acknowledge her victory. But others, like Mrs. Chikir, chose to stay and contribute. "I've spent most of my life trying to impress people who didn't matter," Mrs. Chikir admitted to Amina one day as they stood in the clinic. "But this feels real. Thank you for giving me a second chance." The former politician, Mr. Adewale, had also returned, volunteering as a mentor for young leaders in the community. For him, the scandal surrounding Emerald Hills had been a wake-up call. "I've lost a lot," he told Amina one day. "But I want to help rebuild, starting here." Even Mr. Obesa, after months of silence, reached out to Amina. Humbled and reflective, he offered to fund scholarships for children in the community, a gesture Amina accepted with grace. The family reunited. Amina's mother, Mariam, traveled from their village to see the transformation. When she arrived, tears streamed down her face as she walked through the estate, now brimming with life and laughter. "Your father would be so proud," she said, her voice trembling with emotion. "You've honored his legacy in ways I never imagined." Amina hugged her mother tightly. "I couldn't have done it without his dreams, or without your strength." Mariam decided to stay for a while, teaching women in the community traditional weaving and pottery skills. For her, it was a way to reconnect with her past while contributing to the future. The ripple effect. The story of Babayaro Community Center inspired similar initiatives across the country. Activists, community leaders, and even government officials began to take notice, using Amina's journey as a blueprint for reclaiming misused resources and transforming them for the greater good. Media outlets continued to cover Amina's work, though she shied away from the limelight. She often said, "This isn't about me. It's about all of us." But her humility only amplified her impact. People from across Africa and beyond sought her out, eager to learn from her example and replicate her success. A celebration of legacy. 1 year after the court ruling, the community held a grand celebration to honor the achievements of Babayaro Community Center. Children performed dances and plays, elders shared stories, and artisans displayed their crafts. The event culminated in the unveiling of a statue of Baba, standing tall and proud, a testament to his vision and the perseverance of his daughter. As the crowd erupted in applause, Amina felt a wave of emotion wash over her. This was what her father had dreamed of, a thriving, united community. It was a reminder that true wealth wasn't in marble floors or golden chandeliers but in the strength and spirit of people working together for a common goal. A new chapter. As the celebration wound down and the stars lit up the night sky, Amina sat alone on a bench in the park. She gazed at the statue of her father, her thoughts a mix of gratitude and determination. "This is only the beginning, Baba," she whispered. "There's so much more to do." Amina's journey had come full circle. She had turned her family's loss into a triumph, transforming pain into purpose. The simple girl they had laughed at was now a leader, a beacon of hope in a world desperate for change. And while she had reclaimed her father's land, she had also reclaimed something far more valuable: her voice, her dignity, and her power to make a difference. They had laughed at her simple home, not knowing she owned their luxurious mansions. But now they all knew the truth, and they would never forget her name. The end. If you enjoyed this story, we invite you to give it a like and subscribe to our channel. Your support motivates us to keep bringing heartwarming stories almost every day. We are very grateful for your support. See you soon.